Today, that is October 25th, is Dokdo Day, a day designated to commemorate the historical significance of a Korean island in the East Sea. So how is the day celebrated? Why is neighbouring Japan seeking to lay claim on Dokdo? And what are some intriguing facts about Dokdo Island? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. October 25th marks Dokdo Day, and for more on the importance and implications of this particular day, I have Kwon Soa here in the studio. Soa, it's great to have you back.
Hello, happy Dokdo Day.
Right, thank you. So happy Dokdo Day. I also have Thisanka Siripala, a journalist based in Japan, live on the line. Thisanka, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so let's start here in the studio then. Let's begin with a few words on the designation itself of Dokdo Day.
Sure, so it is the day when we celebrate Korea's easternmost islets of Dokdo, especially the historical meaning behind Dokdo, as it's a symbol of Korean independence and sovereignty. So the day has been observed since year 2000 and on October 25th. So why October 25th? It's because on this day in 1900, Emperor Kwon officially announced the jurisdiction of Dokdo Island as well as nearby Ulleungdo Island. And it's been designated by a civic group, the Party for Dokdo Protection, but also other civic groups participated in this move. So it's not a national commemorative day, but there are actually calls to push for such designation as well. And that especially as Japan's false claims over the island continue. We'll talk more about that in a bit. So today, we have events, festivals, and exhibitions taking place across the country to publicly promote Dokdo and raise awareness on its sovereignty. And from most recent reports, I also saw a flash mob happening today in a city. So there are lots of varieties of events. And even though it's not a government-designated event, there are also government officials as well as politicians who take part, for instance, in seminars. They also speak about this issue. Meanwhile, while today is Dokdo Day across the country, Gyeongsangbuk-do province even celebrates October as the month of Dokdo, and that because Gyeongsangbuk-do is the administrative district that the island belongs to.
Right, I see. And staying with that, Thisanka, I believe Japan also has a day designated for Dokdo Island. Do tell us a bit about it, Thisanka.
Yes, so Japan has launched Takeshima Day, which is on February 22nd. And similarly with South Korea, it is not a national holiday. It was launched by a prefecture in West Japan called Shimane Prefecture, and they are very much behind rallying for people to celebrate the day as a public holiday. On this day on February 22nd, we do see a representative from the central government attend the celebrations, but it is very much limited to West Japan. It is not a mainstream or well-known celebration.
Right. So as you mentioned, then Dokdo, it remains a topic of much contention between Korea and Japan. First then, could you walk us through this diplomatic dispute between the two countries over Korea's Dokdo Island?
Right, Sunny. Dokdo is a symbol and memory of Japan's colonial rule in Korea. Even before Korea's mainland, Japan used the Dokdo Islets to its advantage in 1899 when it seized Dokdo for military purposes against Russia. So Dokdo too was forcibly incorporated into Japanese territory in 1905 when Japan's imperial rule over Korea began. But as Korea regained its independence in 1945, the island naturally was freed as well. But then why does Japan keep making false claims over Dokdo? Japan's government claims it has established sovereignty over Dokdo by the mid-17th century, saying its sailors used it as a navigational port, docking point for ships, and a rich fishing ground. However, Dokdo is recorded as Korean territory since ancient times, since around 1,500 years ago, and throughout the three ancient kingdoms. And what's more, the records exist in Japanese documents as well as on their maps. So there is a lot of evidence that shows that Korea Dokdo belongs to Korea. Now, this dispute, however, is seeing no signs of easing as Japan celebrates its Takeshima Day, as we earlier heard, and it also records its false claims in textbooks and as well as in the annual white paper, its defense paper every year. But although it should actually not be described as a dispute, as South Korea's government says, quote unquote, no territorial dispute exists regarding Dokdo, and therefore Dokdo is not a matter to be dealt with through diplomatic negotiations or judicial settlement. And that because South Korea, Dokdo is a part of Korean territory historically, geographically, and under international law.
Right, a valid point right there then. Meanwhile, Thisanka, some pundits claim that this territorial, I'm going to refer to it as a claim now, appears to be more passionately promoted by ordinary citizens, Koreans themselves, compared to their Japanese counterparts. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this Takeshima Day is not very well made. It's not known in the mainstream. I think it is very much a project by authorities, local authorities in the West, in the western part of Japan. One of the biggest issues Japan is facing at the moment is its current and worsening territorial dispute with China, and in regards to the disputed Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. And that is taking up a lot of the media publicity and media attention. So I think the public in Japan are not, if you ask the ordinary person here in Japan, I doubt they would know much about the territorial dispute. I think that there's a lot more passion and pride that comes with South Korean civilians, and people in South Korea have a civic duty, I feel. But in Japan, I think it's still very much, especially Takeshima Day, is still very much in its infancy. But the the local governments are asking the central governments to make it a public holiday, and in order to help make it to raise awareness of the island and to garner more support from regular citizens in Japan.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Soa, I remember Dokdo also made headlines back in the year 2018, April it was, during the Inter-Korean Summit. Could you tell us a bit about that incident?
Right, Sunny. While most of the world was focused on what the results are going to be from that historic summit between former President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, but Japan, ahead of that meeting, expressed its bitterness towards something sweet. And that was none other than the dessert that was decorated with a blue map of the Korean peninsula, symbolizing unification. And that included Dokdo Island. We can see it here right now in the footage. And it's been there as a blue dot, which represents Dokdo Island. And once images were released off this menu ahead of the meeting, the Japanese government launched a formal protest on the dessert. But the menu was not reconsidered. As you can see, it was served during the summit meeting.
Right. And Thisanka, staying with what Soa has just said, do you recall how this particular dessert was covered by the Japanese media? I mean, what was the public response like that in Japan?
Yes, the Japanese government was absolutely infuriated by the dessert, and as well as the other decorations in the Peace Hall. There were also chairs that included the disputed islands in the engravings of the chairs. And the Japanese government did issue formal protest against the serving of this mango mousse, I believe, and they were absolutely infuriated. And it did reignite a little bit more public attention over the issue in Japan, but I think it still has died down at the moment.
Right. So on a light note then, do share with us some very interesting facts about Dokdo Island.
Well, first off, I want to highlight it's a beautiful, peaceful island. Its nature, its view, its resources, and the islets are volcanic rocks that are covered in layers of soil and moss. So there is a lot of biodiversity there, lots of sea life, and also many species of birds, insects, as well as plants. There is an abundance of these. And also Dokdo is famous for seaweed, kelp, squid, octopus, Alaskan pollock, and codfish. And one thing that I love eating with samgyeopsal, or South Korean style of pork belly, is 명이나물, and it translates into Siberian onion plant. But anyways, it's also something famous on Dokdo. And it's not only nature there. I mean, okay, humans are also part of nature, but there are also inhabitants on the island. You've got one civilian resident. It actually used to be a married couple, but I think one of them passed away years ago. So there's one civilian resident, a few government officials and lighthouse managers, as well as dozens of Coast Guard members. And it's also noteworthy to mention that these are all South Korean citizens and not Japanese. And also there are some more than 130,000 people every year make a visit to the island. Sunny, have you actually been to Dokdo before?
Actually, I haven't been there. I would love to go. I understand it's better to visit there during the summer, though.
Yeah, I think maybe it's because of the weather, because it's not actually that easy, because I was close to getting on the island, because when I used to be a correspondent at the foreign ministry here in Korea, we went on a trip there to Dokdo, the press corps, but the boat couldn't dock on that day. It was because of the currents or, yes, the waves, but it's nothing unusual though. In that case, you make a tour around the island with the boat. So that's my personal experience of Dokdo.
Right, thank you for sharing. And Thisanka, speaking within your capacity as a foreign journalist observing the situation from the sidelines, what are your thoughts on this claim by Japan over Korea's Dokdo Island?
Yeah, so I think this is very much about the way history is remembered between South Korea and Japan. And it's about nationalism, it's about pride, and also about overcoming imperialism and colonialism. Japan and South Korea have a very complicated history. And I think during my time here, I was covering some of the lowest points in bilateral relations between 2018 and 19, when Japan and imposed export restrictions on South Korea on the electronics industry. And it was absolutely, we heard about South Korean anti-Japan boycotts, and that really did impact on Japanese sales of beer and electronics as well, and tourism, car sales as well. But I think what we're seeing now with this new president is a more optimistic approach. We see that North Korea's increasing missile threats and nuclear weapons development program, as that accelerates, we see perhaps more of a closeness and more an attitude towards joint military cooperation, and perhaps a restart towards more trust. And I think that's what we're seeing, especially in New York. On the sidelines, we saw Prime Minister Kishida and Yoon Suk-yeol meet on the sidelines. It was very informal, but I think there is a hint that there are perhaps a restoration of trust between the two neighbours.
Right, the two leaders are seeking a more future-oriented approach to diplomatic ties, I understand. Meanwhile, so back with regard to the Dokdo situation, I do believe that K-pop artists are also being encouraged, are also doing their part, that is, to raise awareness about the islands, right?
Right. These days, K-pop stars really take to social media to raise awareness about a number of things that are Korean. I think we talked about the hanbok issue earlier in our program as well, and I think BTS, Blackpink, and other K-pop groups do the same thing with Dokdo, raising awareness about Dokdo. And I think it is it's kind of a good method to do so, because hashtags are these days really quite impactful. So if you just have, for instance, Dokdo is Korean territory or something like that, the big fan base of these K-pop stars will help in raising the awareness regarding Dokdo. And I also want to mention, there is actually always the question about, should we actually really here in South Korea promote this that much, although we know it's Korean territory? There's been always that question about that, because the more we promote it, then Japan would promote it as well, and then it might look even more like a dispute, which the South Korean government does not want to mention as a dispute. But I think, in my personal opinion, for instance, the K-pop stars movements are a good method in trying to raise the awareness, because many people outside of Korea and Japan really just don't know.
Right, they may not be aware then. All right, so as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Thisanka, over in Japan, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you, Sunny.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Do join us again same time tomorrow. Thank you for now.